Just like those weird little fake retro handhelds you find in the big Tesco, the Nintendo DS had a lot of games. 1.8 inches. Wow. That's usually more than enough, you know. Anyway, the DS had a bunch of games. Arguably, too many. Which is a crazy thing to say, really, but when you've got, I don't know, the Ainsley Harriot Fitness universe clogging up shelves, it's easy for the real gems to get lost. Here then are just some Nintendo DS hidden bangers that you should check out, even if you have to go to some dark parts of the net to experience them. For maximum algorithm flirtation, it'd probably be wise to start off with a game that's mind-blowing visually, something that pushes the DS beyond its limits and had to be banned to stop the handheld from exploding. We are not doing that today though. The Dark Spire is a deliberate throwback to the kind of wireframe dungeon crawlers most people stopped having the patience for decades ago. It wears its wizardry influence very openly. There's first-person exploration, snail-paced movement, and a feeling that the game would quite like to cut you into a million pieces and display you in a box, a glass box, on its mantle. You can switch between a clean, slightly modern presentation and a stark wireframe mode that looks like it's running on a terminal from the early 80s. It's not a simple visual gimmick either, as it reinforces how stripped back the whole experience is. There's also very little in the way of guidance beyond what you figure out for yourself. Progress is slow and often punishing. Mapping the dungeon, managing your party, and surviving encounters all requires attention, and mistakes tend to suck. A lot. It is unapologetically old school, which is both its biggest strength and its main barrier from more casual players picking it up. Stick with it though, and this is another Spire type game that will probably absolutely gobble up your spare time. Just remember though, nobody's been to B&Q and chucked yellow paint on everything here. If you want to be genuinely surprised by just how good a licensed game can be sometimes, look no further than The Wizard of Oz Beyond the Yellow Brick Road, or I don't know, Spider-Man 2 if you want a slightly snappier title. Now, see, The Wizard of Oz might be one of the most iconic films ever made, based on the absolutely unhinged series of novels by L. Frank Baum. But its video game track record hasn't been all that great. Remember the SNES platformer? Well, if you don't, you're luckier than James Franco when he got the lead role in that Oz reboot sequel thing. Anyone remember that? Beyond the Yellow Brick Road takes a different tactic by opting to be good. With gameplay restricted entirely to your touchscreen, the game sees Dorothy and her friends tasked with destroying 4 evil witches in exchange for finally granting their wishes. Haven't they been through enough? Apparently not, and it's your job to defeat these witches, gather up a bunch of magical eggs, and bring them back to the wizard, where surely good things will finally happen for Dorothy and her pals. Either way, this is a surprisingly engaging, well-told story with turn-based RPG mechanics and bright, evocative graphics. It's also a deeper game than you might imagine, with a sizable 20+ hour RPG quest that adds some satisfying additions to a well-loved story. While games based on the beloved Alien film series are a mixed bag with some truly remarkable titles amongst the absolute garbage, Aliens Infestation doesn't get mentioned very often in conversations about the good games. Anyone play Dark Descent? I really like that one. That's too bad, since Infestation is an extremely entertaining side-scrolling action platformer with just enough Metroidvania thrown in to make you feel like you really are trapped on a ship that's crawling with xenomorphs and similar nasty bastards, and it looks lovely as well. Developed by WayForward during a very weird year for them, Aliens Infestation will have you constantly fighting for your life, but the game controls well and balances the furious gunfire with some pretty fun exploration. You'll often find yourself backtracking to previously explored portions of the ship, and it becomes apparent that for a pretty straightforward action game, Aliens Infestation has some nice surprises waiting for players, and some not so nice. Set between the events of Aliens and Alien 3, you'll have a team of Marines to run through the game with, but keep in mind that death is permanent here. If you lose a character, they're not coming back. There's a real sense of consequence to this one, and that goes doubly for your wallet. Really not many people picked this up back in 2011. Aliens Infestation is a tense, often relentless experience, and one of the most underrated games on the DS. It's enough to make you long for a simpler time. What's the word for that again? If you were a fan of RPGs in the 2000s, the Nintendo DS had a lot to keep you busy. Nostalgia got a little lost in the shuffle, and that's too bad for a game whose co-developer in Matrix Software also worked on the 3D graphics for the DS versions of Final Fantasy 3 and 4. In other words, Nostalgia is an absolutely gorgeous game with bright, vivid characters and backgrounds in an alternate reality steampunk-soaked version of the 19th century. There's a lot of old-school JRPG charm being combined with then modern enhancements and quality of life features in Nostalgia, and it's a must-play for genre fans. While most of Nostalgia sticks to your turn-based JRPG expectations, there is a visual flair to these characters and their world that'll make you want to explore this universe from top to bottom. It can get a little grindy at times, but long-time RPG players aren't likely to mind that too much. And while the main story is suitably epic, it's when the game lets you fully explore your surroundings with a Zeppelin that Nostalgia really starts to show off its uniqueness. You've never seen a version of New York or London like you'll see in the world of Nostalgia. It's not the greatest game of all time, granted, but it is well worth seeking out. As the wise Booker T once said,
"Can you dig it, sucker?"
In Fossil Fighters, you can, and then you can make dinosaurs batter each other. But it would be categorically unfair to dismiss Fossil Fighters as just a Pokemon clone. It doesn't even have Mr. Mime in it, for goodness sake. You'll be missing out on a game with a rich story, compelling characters, and the admittedly very cool ability to bring dinosaurs back from the dead and square them off against one another in turn-based combat. Instead of chasing down and catching monsters in the wild, Fossil Fighters is more about finding, you guessed it, fossils on the exotic varied Vivosaur Island. There's over 100 different dinosaurs to revive, referred to in the game as Vivosaurs, and you know, the island thing, and the designs for the dinosaurs are excellent across the board. Outside of collecting creatures and basic RPG mechanics, Fossil Fighters easily stands on its own. The process of getting the creatures in of itself establishes a different relationship to your monsters than in other similar games. You found them and essentially brought them back to life. Isn't that neat? The characters and dialogue aren't on the level of larger, more ambitious RPGs, but any game with time travel and dinosaurs has to be worth a look, right? Fossil Fighters finds its own ways to make its gameplay addictive, including the fact that you'll be using the stylus for the excavation portion of the game. Fossil Fighters doesn't become so much of a grind that you stop having fun though. The game has charm enough to keep you coming back, and if you like it enough, there's even a couple of sequels to dig through. Nine people seemingly find themselves participating in a horrific life and death game. Don't give Netflix any ideas, people. They'll probably get there themselves. Released under the title 9 Hours, 9 Persons, 9 Doors, players begin the nightmare as young Junpei, who wakes up on a sinking cruise liner with 8 other people. These poor buggers will have to work together to survive, and 999 is particularly good at giving you a constant sense of dread, mystery, and death at every corner. This isn't overtly a horror game, but it is an intense experience on the Nintendo DS nevertheless. 999 9 Hours, 9 Persons, 9 Doors is mostly a visual novel, with players making careful narrative choices to unlock one of the game's 6 dramatically varied endings. The dual screen is used interestingly here, with characters and dialogue taking up the top screen, while the bottom screen has detailed feelings, thoughts, and even actions from the game's narrator. When you aren't making choices in the text, 999 has point-and-click adventure elements that are surprisingly challenging in places. This one really knows how to use the strength of its genre, pulling you into a game that feels like getting to host the bleakest new game show you've ever seen. 999 is a dark ride, but it's one that's hard to put down. When you do, you can pick up the sequels. You'll be well read afterwards. As the title of the action rail shooter Little Red Riding Hood Zombie Barbecue implies, you're Little Red Riding Hood, and you've got a massive arsenal to help you obliterate the relentless and ravenous hordes of the undead. Let's get to work. Set in a storybook world that also features public domain fairy tale characters like Pinocchio and the 3 Little Pigs, Little Red Riding Hood Zombie Barbecue sees you teaming up with Momotaro, the Japanese folk story character, in your quest to save the world. There's a pretty chunky degree of challenge waiting for you in this relentless shmup as you mow down zombies with weapons like shotguns, laser beams and flamethrowers. The story goes roughly the way you think it will, but there's also a game that's easy to get into, with the plot managing to wring some surprises out of a pretty mad premise. I kinda don't want to spoil it, but for international copyright law reasons, it is not Godzilla. It's all about the execution of a concept, and Little Red Riding Hood Zombie Barbecue is an arcade-style shooter that will probably butter the biscuits of Rapid Reload and Wild Guns fans. With a name like Little Red Riding Hood Zombie Barbecue, you're either going to get a hidden gem or a crushing disappointment. Good news, this game is the former. Let's shuffle on to the next game of today. Coming from the legendary Hironobu Sakaguchi, Away's Shuffle Dungeon takes a familiar setup and warps it into something that feels slightly ahead of our ADHD-ridden times. You see, each floor is split into rotating segments that shift in real time, meaning routes open up and close constantly while you're moving. You're waiting, watching and timing your steps so the layout lines up in your favour. It gives the whole thing a slight puzzle-driven feel, or like Mr. Beast's newest sociopathic experiment. Sorry, social experiment. Social, allegedly. The structure ties into its story as well. The town of Weblog is stuck in stasis after a disaster, with its residents frozen in time. Venturing into these unstable dungeons is how you gather energy to restore them, which gives the loop a bit more purpose than just cleaning floors for loot. By cleaning, I meant clearing. You put some fairy liquid on those dungeon floors and you'll get a crown. The system creates a unique blend, even if the moment-to-moment combat stays fairly basic. That simplicity can work against it, mind you. Fights don't evolve much, and the repetition creeps in over longer sessions. Still, the constantly shifting layout keep it engaging in short bursts. It's fun to pick up and play between bouts of your parents shouting at each other. It's a strange, slightly awkward experiment, but one that feels tailor-made for the DS. This psychological horror story involving two narrative paths, one of a young girl in an abandoned prison and the other involving a man trying to escape from an orphanage, is pretty brutal at times. It is after all one of only 11 games that received an M rating on the DS, but it's also one of the best horror games on the system too. Coming from the now defunct Workjam, with the soundtrack being scored by the composer behind Shenmue, movement in Teresia mode has your character navigating dangerous, mysterious surroundings while searching for different rooms, and observational mode involves deeper investigations of specific areas to help you beat some fiendish puzzles. While all these gameplay elements are pretty solid, with the game being maybe slightly wonky during its dungeon crawling segments, Teresia perhaps shines best with its storytelling, sense of pace, and overall atmosphere. The game draws from its visual novel strengths to create something that feels like the kinda eerie, barely for human consumption game for the PS1 that never left Japan. Just be warned that this is one of the darkest stories you'll ever encounter in a video game. It's as heartbreaking as it is deeply creepy, but not as heartbreaking as what it will do to your wallet. Moon is a decent game on the Nintendo DS. Always has been. Moon is a first-person shooter that deliberately avoids most of the things people associate with handheld FPS games. Instead of constant firefights, it's more about slow exploration, light puzzle solving, and a mystery. You're investigating a mysterious signal on the moon, moving through abandoned structures that feels kinda slightly like a more survival horror-y Metroid Prime. It is not on that level, don't get us wrong, but it is good. Technically, it is pretty impressive stuff for the hardware. Renegade Kid had already shown what they could do with Dementium, but Moon feels like them cracking their knuckles a little bit. There are larger environments, smoother pacing, and fewer moments where the DS seems like it's about to give up. It actually manages to hit 60 frames per second, which is nuts. The touchscreen aiming holds up well, which is half the battle for a handheld FPS game, but obviously you do need to get used to it these days. Now, there is a good wedge of combat here, but you don't need to do any slide cancelling against the mice stealing or the moon cheese or anything like that. You're not constantly under pressure, and that gives the game space to build atmosphere through discovery rather than just constant loud noises. There are some of those, but it's not just all loud noises. It didn't make much of a splash at the time at all really, but it later resurfaced as Moon Chronicles for the 3DS, a reworked episodic version with updated visuals and expanded content that was also pretty overlooked. Oh. Well, don't overlook the outro, yeah? Outro gang, you freshly tumble-dried pair of blue jeans. That was just a quick look at some hidden gems on the Nintendo DS. What else should we cover on the Nintendo DS? Which other console should we do more of? I've been Jimmy for Cultured Vultures. Let me know down below where this isn't quite right. Bye!